Yeah, welcome everyone. Really excited to have Michael Henderson on our webinar, on Govn365 webinar on shifting culture, rethinking organisational values. Just in terms of, if anyone's got any questions, just put them in the Q&A or chat, and as we go along, I'll be keeping an eye on them to see if we can add them in. So please throw your questions in. Before we get started, I just wanted to share what Govn365 does. So in a nutshell, we help simplify governance, and that's organisational governance, not just for the board. So we do an in-person evaluation with the combination of the board and the executive team, facilitating an organisational health check and ensuring alignment on where the organisation is now. And we help them land on the 2 or 3 organisational priorities to add value or reduce risk. Then we follow up with a coaching session over the year, 4 coaching sessions, and support them to embed better practices and turn actions into value. So alignment, focus, and value. And one of the areas we evaluate is people and culture. So many people talk about he tangata, the people. But there's so many stories of organisations who have ignored the people, have focused on only the shareholders or the mechanics of an organisation, not the dynamics in terms of the relationships and culture. And they've created cultures where people not want to work. And according to, if you look at Gallup, some of the research they've done in 2022 in Australia and New Zealand, only 23% of employees are engaged. So, 1/4 of people are engaged in the organisation, 67% are not engaged, which has a direct correlation to your performance of the organisation. The more engaged, the more productive, the lower turnover of staff, higher sales, higher impact if you're a not-for-profit, and higher profit if you're commercial. But what's the role of values on the organisation? So many organisations have them. Many have them in name only on the wall, but do they really make a difference? And how do you develop them? How do you embed them? And how do you use them? Many years ago, I read a book to help me understand this area called Leading with Values, linking company culture to business strategy, which was co-authored by Michael Henderson. So it was a great pleasure. I welcome Michael to the webinar. With over 4 decades of experience and a track record of over 300 successful cultural transformational projects, Michael is a seasoned corporate anthropologist. We'll come on to that, who strategically moulds organizations' cultures using anthropological insights. As a distinguished keynote speaker and educator, he emphasizes the significance of understanding, evolving, and optimizing culture. So welcome, Michael. Fantastic to have you on the webinar.
Thanks, Gerry. Kia ora, everyone.
So first, I just wanted to get an understanding of what exactly is a corporate anthropologist and what you do.
Sure. Yeah, it's a good place to start. Really simply, if we just take the 2 words separately, corporate is obviously what most people will recognize it as. It's kind of large scale sort of organizations, but we do work with organizations that are not corporate. So NPOs, professional sports teams, military units, medical teams, educational facilities. So it's basically just big organizations. And when I say big, it can also be small. And then the anthropology is the social science that you can go and study at the university. And it's quite a complex, broad-ranging social science that is broken down into special areas. So that's things like social anthropology, which is the study of how does culture form and why do humans create cultures in the first place and how does that occur? Which is the area that I got my degree in. There's other areas like linguistic anthropology, which is how does language develop and why does it develop? And what are the constructs of language that contain components of principles or wisdom or insight that enable culture to be transmitted from one generation to the next by passing on through key words or through key concepts. There's another component called physical anthropology, which is where archaeology sits. And that in itself is a huge field. It stretches from everything from crime scene investigations to Indiana Jones looking for artifacts in Egypt. And the final one is what's called cognitive anthropology, which is a relatively new compared to the others aspect of anthropology, which looks at the role that neurology and the brain plays in the forming of culture. So what's going on in the brain when culture is participated in? How does belonging impact on people's neurological processing? How does exclusion from a sense of belonging impact on neurological processing? And the most advanced aspects of that are even starting to get into the anthropology of consciousness, which is a absolutely fascinating area that I think you're going to start to see more and more and more of emerging inside organizational awareness, especially as artificial intelligence advances its impact into life and businesses. I think you're going to see a response to almost balance that out a little bit in this sort of cognitive anthropology space.
Yeah, so quite a few areas. So if we touch on you talked about the social anthropology, how culture formed. Can you, I mean, in the simplest term, what is culture, and how do you, if you start a business, how do you form a culture?
Yeah, great question. So let's start with what is culture. And if you go and talk to, it depends on who you talk to as to how they answer that question. So I'm very aware, I'm just kind of sharing where I've got to. So I've been doing this for 40 years now. And where I've got to is I've gone right back using the linguistic anthropology to actually kind of look up the etymology of the word culture, like where did it actually come from? So it's actually Latin, and it's come from two words, colere and cultus, which if you translate that into English means to care. So I love the simplicity of that, the purity of that, and the functionality of that. So basically what culture actually means is, what do a group of people care about? So what do they believe in? What are they committed to? What are they motivated for? How do they make meaning? Do they care for each other, or do they care to compete? Do they care to survive, or do they care to progress? So if you just take it at its most simplest principle-based form, just understanding culture means care is incredibly useful as an insight over your business. Literally just walk through the business for the next 30 days with that question in mind, right? You walk into accounts, go, okay, I'm sitting and observing the accounts team doing the thing. What do they care about? Now, a lot of that, of course, is going to be intangible. So they're not going to sit there announcing what they care about. But if you get into conversations with them or observation of them, that can emerge, and you can inquire into it, of course. So I think that's a really useful understanding of the concept of culture, because I'm a little tired of organizations oversimplifying this. If you've ever heard, and I'm sure many of your listeners have heard this, where you get business people refer to culture as the way we do things around here. So the way we do something is often to do with a process or a system that we've inherited. So culture isn't the way we do things around here. Culture is why we do things this way around here. So if you listen to the difference between those two, one is almost like asking for compliance, is look, here's the system and process, just use it. Whereas the social anthropology angle on it is, well, why would people care enough about that to be committed to implement it in your absence? So this concept of care becomes really, really important. And if you get it right, and I'm not being corny here, we've got the data to back this up, it literally becomes a competitive advantage, because you're really starting to get to the point where you're saying our organization out cares our competitors.
Yeah. No, I really like that difference there. The way we do things versus why we do things this way. So if you were trying to influence as a leader, people want to influence to get a better culture. How should they go about positively influencing that?
Well, I think the first thing is, again, great question. I think the first thing is, with the greatest respect, and this is going to sound like I'm being a little harsh on executives. Most executives do not have a really good understanding what culture is in the first place.
Yeah.
So I think even in your opening remarks, some of them just see it as a mechanistic matrix, numerical reporting process that they have to provide to the board, so the board can give them the green tick or the acceptance that, okay, so you paid attention to culture because you've shown me some numbers. So I think the most important and the most effective thing any leadership team can do to enhance culture is actually invest some time and energy in getting a little bit more awareness, or even education in what is culture, Where does it come from? How does it form and function? What does it deliver? Who owns it and who leads it? So I've just mentioned maybe half a dozen aspects of things that you would need to be aware of if you're going to create a high performing culture. And what I find is when I ask those questions to my clients, when I first engage with them, sit with the board or the executive team, the vast majority of them have either no answer to those questions or very, very shallow and limited understanding of them, which means they're not in a position to leverage the opportunity with it.
Yeah. So if I'm, I go to one end of the extreme where I'm a director in an organization, I realize that, through feedback or people leaving, that the culture is poor, or people have said toxic,
Yeah.
what should I do to understand, the source of the issue, and how to get under the hood of the organization more, I suppose? Where would I start?
Again, I'm going to kind of bring it back to cultural awareness or education. So what happens is a lot of organizations in that situation when they're still got high staff turnover or silo mentality, or I think you were quoting Gallup before in terms of really, really low levels of engagement, they kind of hit the panic button and rush into action using old methodology or old understanding and knowledge of culture to try and get the thing back on course. So that could be, we need to refresh our values, or we need to come up with a new exciting purpose statement, or we need to put chocolate biscuits in the canteen to give everyone a sugar boost. So whatever, it's all really, really well intended, and I salute and respect the intent behind it. It's just a little naive and a little simplistic, and often a little too late. So once you've got a toxic culture, some of the cultural constructs that would cause the toxicity can go quite deep, quite fast. And so if you, it's like if you're just trimming the top level of the weeds, you're not really getting to the root issues. So again, my first kind of piece of guidance or direction is just take some time and massively enhance your awareness of what we're actually talking about.
And how would I do that? And the sort of second question in relation to that is, does it stem from the leader? If it's the CEO, who's the most senior person in the organization, can someone below them realistically change things if it's not coming from the top?
Yeah, absolutely they can. And that's the beauty of culture, because culture belongs to the people. It doesn't belong to the leader, and it doesn't belong to the business. It doesn't belong to the board. So, and this is the anthropological understanding that I think is so important. So just finish saying this, Gerry, but I think Hillary's just typed in a question we should honor in a moment as well, if that's okay.
Yep.
The anthropological aspect is, by definition, culture belongs to the people that are participating in it. So they absolutely not only have the power and the influence to change it, they also have the accountability for the culture as well. Having said that, to your point, leaders can have a negative impact on culture through, again, a lack of knowledge or awareness or understanding, or through, as I'm sure we've all come across at some stage in our career, a personality that's just not human-centric. And so that can be sort of problematic. And at the same time, I find when leaders assume, if they're the founder of the business, then there's a good chance that they really have laid the foundation and the DNA of the culture. And there's a lot of case studies that demonstrate that. And that can be a profoundly powerful culture to have, where the DNA of the leader or the founders or the elders is still there and present even multiple generations later. It can be incredibly powerful. On the other hand, I often find when leaders are, particularly if they've got vanity or ego issues, or maybe even slightly leaning on this psychopathic kind of profile, sometimes their behavior, intent, languaging, presence can actually be counter to culture. And what actually ends up happening is they end up inadvertently creating a cult, not a culture. Not realizing that the moment you do that, you are incredibly vulnerable for collapse. And probably the most famous example of that was Enron.
Yeah. Hmm. And so, Hillary, to answer Hillary's question, could you speak about how do you solicit feedback from employees to continuously improve and evolve culture?
Yeah,
What?
great question, Hillary. The generic way, of course, in organizations is to run a survey and ask questions. So that is definitely a vehicle you could use. One of the things I've found is that question that you're asking, which is such a great question, is how do you believe we can continually improve or evolve our culture? Often that type of question is not even included in the survey. And so it's going to sound a bit flippant, but I'm actually quite genuine about it. I think one of the most powerful questions you should always attempt to include in your culture survey or an engagement survey is this: what questions would you like to see in our next survey that are not in this one? Right. So actually asking your people, what questions do you want in the survey? Because they will start to place questions that start to speak to the opportunity to improve or evolve the culture, Hillary. Or likewise, they will also highlight areas that maybe people in culture, HR, or the leadership team haven't even thought about because they're not the experience the employees are having. So, you may get a question that the employees suggest should be in the next survey, which is, as a manager and leader of the business, do you believe your interaction with your staff is having a positive impact or a negative impact? Right. So just asking your people what questions should we be asking of ourselves, rather than just assuming that the psychologists or whoever's provided your survey know the perfect questions to ask. The other point on that as well, sorry, you got me on my bandwagon now. The other point on that as well is it does my head in when I see surveys asking exactly the same questions they did last year and the year before and the year before, usually because the board wants to track consistency or wants to measure your culture versus so-called benchmarks in the industry. And I get the logic of that, but the actuality of that is, why would you be asking yourself the same questions this year that you asked last year? Because quite frankly, I don't have a single client I'm working with anywhere in the world at the moment that is in the same situation this year that they were in last year. So why would you be asking questions from 5 years ago, pre-COVID questions, in a post-COVID world, or pre-VUCA questions in a post-VUCA world, etc.? So I really think Hillary's kind of asking a really good question is, yeah, you've got to stay current. You've got to stay vulnerable. Like, you've got to be up for asking the brave, deeper questions rather than just the functionally comfortable questions.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think some companies want to see progress. So if they've got a benchmark, then it's easy to look at that way.
Gerry,
Rod's,
I was going to say, Rod's sort of just linked to similar question. Can I just link something?
Yeah, go on to that. Yeah.
So Rod, again, great question, bud. And I was just saying to Gerry before we started this, in New Zealand, I have a bit of a mixed reputation in the marketplace. So I would say 1 in 5 people in the marketplace are okay with me, and about 4 out of 5 aren't, because I tend to be a little bit of a heretic and really challenge the status quo. So I feel like a little bit like the kid in The Emperor's New Clothes that pointed out the emperor was naked. So one of the things I would say is, from an anthropological point of view, Rod, you can't measure culture. And let me explain what I mean by that. There's plenty of things you can measure. You can measure staff engagement. You can measure productivity. You can measure performance. But none of those things are culture. So we often make a distinction in our work when we're working with clients to say culture is meaningful, business is measurable. So one of the things you're looking to do is understand culture as a subjective experience rather than an objective measurement process. And of course, what that does is, if that makes any sense to you, and I absolutely accept for some of you it won't, and I might have ruffled some feathers there, and I'm completely okay with that. One of the things that says straight away is benchmarking culture against another business is absolutely a waste of time. And let me explain what I mean by that. So I've been very, very fortunate to spend time with indigenous cultures around the world in Africa and the Amazon. And some of those cultures are profound in terms of their human centricity, their longevity. So that, they've been around for thousands of years compared to organizational cultures that are 50 years old and think they're doing great. and have dealt with unbelievable change during that time. But here's the interesting thing. I have yet to visit a Indigenous group of people who have what I consider to be an amazing culture that use engagement surveys or culture surveys to maintain it. So you kind of go, well, that's interesting. How have these people had the same culture for 10,000 years and never measured anything? And yet I would argue they're often in a far better place in terms of belonging, in terms of well-being, in terms of holistic understanding and connection with nature and the environment. They're often profoundly far ahead of where organizations are, and yet they're not using measurement tools at all. So there's something else going on that maybe organizations could start to think about or factor in.
So is it a more subjective view that, there will be signals when things are going wrong, and there's obviously signals when things are going right in terms of people smiling, the interactions you have with people? Is that the sort of thing that leaders should be looking at? Is, are my people speaking up? Are they, do they look good? Are they telling me they're feeling good? So is it more subjective measures that leaders need to sort of keep an eye out for?
Absolutely. And again, I mean, we're struggling around the world, aren't we? With just even teaching there's a huge emphasis all around the world on teaching leaders things like emotional intelligence, which is, I just find as a human being, that's staggering, right? It's like, how on earth have you become a leader without having emotional intelligence in the first place, right? And what game have you been playing? So yeah, you're right. A big part of it is actually helping leaders. And again, I kind of sound like I'm being harsh on them. I absolutely have a lot of compassion for them because nobody's ever told them this. Nobody's ever trained them this. There's not an MBA program in the world that does a comprehensive job in helping leaders prepare for leading culture or understanding culture. So it's completely not their fault, right? It's just nobody's ever equipped them. And so they're either relying on a natural affinity for that or a natural leaning towards that or not. And therefore, it's kind of a little bit risky almost from a risk management point of view, or maybe even from a governance point of view back into your space. So yeah, a big part of it is leaders learning. It's not just leaders, it's employees as well, learning what are the things we look for that would indicate a culture is optimizing its caring and delivering from that level of care into contributions to the business or to customers that are aligned with our strategic objectives. So possibly the most important piece of work I do in the initial stage of the work is help organizations understand how you align culture as a strategic asset. Because if it's not a strategic asset, it's doing the opposite straight away. You can almost guarantee it. So I've just saw Joanne Harland, Gerry's asked us if we wouldn't mind just reading out the questions because some of people can't see. So I apologize.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
No, that's my bad as well. I just saw that and realized some of the questions we've been going, oh, Mary's got a question, and we've responded without necessarily.
Yeah. Hillary's initial questions. You speak about how you solicit feedback from employees to continuously improve and evolve culture. Simple steps. That was the first one. Rod talked about, would you support the use of cultural measurement to understand where an organisation is at? So answer is no in general, but it's about noticing things. So, and I've got an example from my son the other night, because I got this text from him at 10:40 at night, and I'm in bed by then. And it said, "Good night, Dad. Love you." I've never had a text like that, so I thought something's not right.
Right.
So I rang him the next morning. I said, "That was interesting. You sent that." And he went, "Oh yeah, I'm feeling a bit homesick, and he's away at time." So it was just I suppose noticing something different, and when something's not quite as it has been, or so. But yeah. Mary Oberlay's got a question here, which is, how can people who feel absolutely powerless, e.g. low-level workers in a large organisation, have an influence on the organisational culture?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mary, and I'll try and respond for you. A lot of what you've just described there is to do with context, which is what's occurred that's made them feel powerless in the first place. So I will attempt to respond, but please feel free to come back to me, Mary, if it's comfortable to do so, maybe just alluding to some context that doesn't reveal anything commercially sensitive, etc. But the first thing they can do is ask questions of the business or of their manager, or if there's a formal line of inquiry into, again, why the circumstances are the way they are and what pathways are open to them to inquire into those, challenge those, question those, have the opportunity for a forum or discussion about those. So I think the starting place is people sticking out their hand and just saying, please guide us, to the manager or the supervisor, or maybe it's through HR or organizational development, saying, can you please guide me, or can you please guide my team and I on what the pathway is to have a conversation around this the situation that we find ourselves in, where we're feeling absolutely powerless or feeling restricted, etc. So I think dialogue is the best starting place, but part of the feeling absolutely powerless in the first place, to your point, Mary, could be that it's not safe to communicate anymore in the business anyway. And so that's what I meant by context. If you've got, for example, bullying going on, and you end up with the supervisor saying, if you dare go to HR on this, right, there will be consequences. If you get that sort of behavior going on as well, then it needs a little bit more exploration and investigation. So it is always contextual in terms of possibly the best way, but wherever possible, you're just asking for the opportunity to have dialogue, raise the issue, ask questions, maybe even become informed. We don't understand why we've been deprived of, these resources. Can someone please explain to us, so at least we understand the thinking of the business as to, why they've taken all the forklifts away and we're now doing manual labor.
Yeah. And I suppose one of the key might be actually getting a group of people together at the same level, so colleagues, so that there's more than one, so you don't feel maybe on your own asking the question. We've got another question here from Victoria. Are there common factors that support an organisation to have a good culture, or is it unique to each organisation?
Great question, Victoria. Yes, there are universally common factors. In our work, we talk about that as being the architecture of culture, which unfortunately we probably haven't got time to go through because it takes quite a bit of explaining, and there's some very complex parts to that. But if you just think about having a good house, right? The architecture of the house is a really foundational, important construct that determines whether the house is going to be good long term, or fit for purpose is another way of thinking it. So there is a universal human architecture for culture that every single culture in the world has, whether it knows it or not. So that would be the first thing. The second thing I would say, Victoria, and I love the fact you put the word good in inverted commas, so thank you for that. Sorry, this is the warning I said we won't.
We can't hear your dog, so he did say he's got a couple of dogs that will bark, but we can't hear them. So.
Oh, perfect. All right. Sorry, they just went off. So that means one of the tradies is dying.
Right.
So if I'm going to tell you a quick story, and I'll keep this very, very short, but just to point out what Victoria is pointing to here. I had a call with a client, or a prospective client, I should say, from overseas last year. One of the board of directors had heard me speak at a conference and sort of said to the CEO, I'd really like you to reach out and speak to this guy in New Zealand. I think he's got some important things to say around culture, and it would be great if you just connect and maybe to see if they can be supportive. So the CEO reached out to me. We ended up jumping on a Zoom call just for an initial conversation. And she was a little bit indignant and put out. And she said, look, I really don't understand why the board's asked me to make contact with you, Michael. We've got a good culture. Right. So, okay, well, that's great. I said, well, maybe we can talk about that then. And congratulations if you've got a good culture. That's great, because a lot of organizations don't. What do you mean by good? Right. So I just asked the question. You said that you've got a good culture. What do you mean by good? And she ummed and ahed. So she said, well, it's going well. I said, well, what do you mean it's going? What does that look like? What does going well look like? Well, people are contributing. And so she kept using these almost evasive adjectives to describe the culture. And so I said, I think I understand why it's been recommended I have a chat with you. I said, again, I love the fact that you are even interested and feel like it is good. But do you mind if I just pose some questions to you And this is not to challenge you as a CEO. It's not to challenge anything you've just said. It's just, it might be an opportunity that the board member has picked up on that you and I could then dialogue on. She went, oh, okay. So I said, look, when you said good culture, I said, good for who? Who benefits from your culture? Right. And she went, well, employees. I went, great. Well, that's great. And if your employees are benefiting, that's fantastic. What about customers? And she goes, oh, actually, no, we've had some concerns around our net promoter score. Okay. I said, what about the leaders of the business? And she goes, well, no, sometimes they kind of don't really get a good grasp and understanding of the employees. The employees are happy, but the leaders almost feel like they're all running off doing their own thing. And I said, great. I said, so good for how long? And she said, what do you mean? I said, well, no culture is fit for purpose permanently. This good culture you've got at the moment, what's the prediction on how long it's going to be good for? And what are going to be the signs that tell you, ooh, it's not good anymore. We need to adopt or evolve it or update it. So just those type of questions, Victoria, are really, really useful, is actually understanding, even when we say good culture, what do we mean by that? What is it that we are referring to or that we are aiming or aspiring to? So you want to be looking at, who's the culture good for? What's the culture good for? Which is a hugely important. I've seen organizations spend tens and if not hundreds of thousands, and in several cases, millions of dollars on building a so-called good culture that, again, as I said earlier in the conversation, wasn't aligned to as a strategic asset. So it was a wonderful culture, but 3 years later, the business had collapsed. But people had a lot of fun while it was going down. Right, yeah. It's going out of business. So great culture, but wasn't aligned as a strategic asset. So you're suddenly kind of going, well, that was good for a short time and good for a good time, but not much more than that. So
sounds a bit like WeWork.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Well, one question I wanted to ask is around values. So obviously that's how I sort of first saw you. The value of values, and I'll link this with personal values because it's something I know you're doing some work. I read a piece of research recently about the value of helping your employees to understand their own values, and that actually has a big impact on organizational performance and the strategy. So can you tell me a little bit more? It's a bit of a leading question, really, around the value of values and not just organizational values, but personal values.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're speaking into probably one of the most dominant trends for organizational culture that has emerged post-COVID. We've been waiting in anthropology for decades for this, and it's now here. And I'm going to suggest to you over the next 3 years, by 2027, if you haven't, as an organization, paid attention to this, I genuinely believe all the points and all the data is showing you're going to be seriously caught out if you haven't had a look at this. So let me just give you a little bit of history on this. The futurist, the English, British academic researcher and futurist John Elkington in 1997 wrote a book called Cannibals with Forks. First of all, it's a lovely title because you're going to, what? Cannibals with Forks. And what he was basically arguing was businesses have got very, very sophisticated with technology and clever thinking and theory and academics and processes and systems. So it's like we've got all the tools, we've got forks, but fundamentally, if we look at how we treat each other and the environment and the planet, we're basically cannibals, right? We're still eating each other in competition. We're still competing with each other inside the business. We're still doing extensive damage to the planet and so on. But he raised the concept of early adopters being organizations that suddenly started to realize that personal values are actually far more influential and powerful to people's performance in an organization than organizational values are. And that research was backed up by extensive research done by Coos and Posner that over an 11-year period basically said Elkington's sort of hypothesis is actually factually based, to the extent that they identified that when people in a business clarify their personal values, their commitment to their work and their contribution to the business goes up on average by 17%. Wow. Whereas having memorable clarification on the company values, what that means is you can recite and understand, the 5 company values, the 4 company values you've got, actually has between 0 or minus 0.5% impact on person's commitment and contribution to the business. In other words, it didn't have any impact whatsoever. So that when that research came out, that was incredibly provocative. And so it got replicated. That research came out in the States, it got replicated in Europe and again in the States 5 years later. And then my business has actually repeated the research here in New Zealand and Australia 3 times. The last time we did it was just post-COVID. It's just so expensive to do that probably I'll never do it again. But all the data is showing the same thing. We found in New Zealand that the 17% in America was actually closer to 38% in New Zealand.
Wow.
So significantly more important in New Zealand. Slightly less in Australia. It was around 32%, I think it was in Australia. So again, more so. But post-COVID, those numbers have doubled.
Wow.
So the impact So this, if you remember the Great Resignation and the great kind of reorientation, do I work from home or work from the office? Personal values literally are sitting at the core of that discussion. They are the underlying sense making that people are using to make those decisions, as is the case with diversity and inclusion.
Yeah.
And identity politics. It's all centered around personal values, as is health and well-being and mental well-being. So suddenly the old concept of organizational values being the be-all and end-all of a culture, all the data and the research that we've had for decades has suddenly landed and people are going, oh, hang on a minute. We need to rethink what we're doing here. So yeah. And I think we've got somebody has posed a question, the anonymous attendee has just raised that very question, saying that they've recently ditched the company values and kind of moving more towards the human values. And so anonymous attendee, I would applaud you, because that's exactly what all the data is showing. Just last year alone, we did 3,000 personal values inventories in New Zealand alone for employees in organizations that just wanted to check, do I still want to be here? Do I really want to be here? If I am going to be here, what do I want to benefit from and what do I want to contribute? So the values sit at the core of all those discussions.
Yeah. So if you were, I mean, I've done an exercise where I've, very simple, it might be the wrong way of doing it, given people a whole list of different values and then said, what are your top 5 personally? And getting them to just try and hone down to the top 5 and why, tell me why that's your top value. Is that the way you sort of understand people's values, or what's the best way of trying to pull out their personal values?
Yeah, it's a good approach. The thing I've found is when you give people a list, the first thing to do is check, where's the list come from?
Yeah.
So that's the very first thing you have to do. And again, especially with diversity and inclusion, I find a lot of the pre-existing lists, so-called in New Zealand, are from North America initially. And also, not that there's anything wrong with this, but again, it's just you need the audience to be aware of it. But they often are based in moral foundational research, not values foundational research. So what does that mean? Moral foundational research often comes out of a religious institution. So in other words, you end up with a list of values that you might share with your employees, not realizing that they are Christian values.
Right.
Which is fine if you're a Christian, or it's also fine if you're an atheist or agnostic and are quite comfortable with embracing Christian values. But there's so many other religions and cultures that would find another way of expressing the same sentiment that suddenly people can't access. So that would be my first thing, is just check the source before you do anything with it. So my preference is the vehicle we use is a anthropologically based list, which has got values from every culture on the planet included in it. So it means it's extensive and long, but you can find what you're looking for in it. Second thing I would say, Gerry, is I think you said, help them find their values and then maybe asking them why, why they're important. I get that, and I've seen that happen in a number of organizations as well. You've got to be careful when you ask somebody why they value the value they value. And the reason being, this is back into cognitive anthropology, is the moment somebody asks you why you value something, it's actually received neurologically as a challenge.
Right.
It's almost like, oh, you value this? Justify it. And so what happens is the moment you ask somebody why they value something, what happens is the part of the brain that gets involved moves out of value neuronets and moves into moral neuronets. So morals about right and wrong. or ethics, which are about group behaviors, whereas values are about what is the meaning of that for you and
Right.
how does it motivate you. So instead of saying why have you chosen that, or why is the value, what you're actually better saying is, oh, I see you've chosen that. That's wonderful. Without telling me, can you explore for yourself why that value is meaningful for you? And once you've established that, can you see what that value would motivate you to do or not do, to commit to and not commit to? So it's actually quite a private conversation. And here's the other thing I'm just going to say on this, and then I'll stop talking. We've done over 30,000, maybe closer to 35,000 now, personal values debriefs. And listen to this, no two have ever been the same.
Wow.
So they are inventories, not profiles. And the values individuals select, including myself, can and do change over time. And you can even deliberately work with a value to reduce its influence over your decision-making, your emotions. And if any of your listeners are familiar with things like ACT therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, that's why they use personal values as one of the most central focus points of that work, because it empowers the individual to be accountable for their own thinking, their own responses to how they're operating.
Yeah, a couple of questions here relating to aligning personal values with organizational values. So the one is, isn't recruitment the opportunity to align personal values and organizational values? And the second one linked is, surely the trick is to get alignment between personal and organizational values rather than taking away the organizational values. Organizational values are an important part of maintaining strategic alignment. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go with the first one first. I think it was Rod's question. Isn't recruitment the opportunity to align personal values with organizational values? Yes, it is, Rod, if the individual being recruited knows with absolute clarity their personal values. And what I find, especially in New Zealand, most people think they know what the values are until you ask them, and then they suddenly are second guessing themselves, right? So they'll do things like, well, I suppose it would be family and integrity, and and of course health. So it's almost like they're guessing right in front of you. Whereas when you actually know your values, you can speak authoritatively to them and go, yep, my top 5 values are these. This is number 1. This is number 2, which, as you can probably hear, supports number 1. This is number 3, which, as you can hear, can have conflict with them. So they're really informed and they know how to work with them. So if you've got individuals that are being recruited that can speak to that, then and only then you can ask them about the company values and therefore how they see their personal values are in alignment with, or contradiction with, or neutral with their own personal values. So it does require the individual to have a good grounding in their own personal values. And then, as Jeremy said, surely the trick is to get alignment between personal values and organizational values rather than taking away organizational values. Well, all the research shows, Jeremy, is you're right. That's the ideal. If you kind of can get personal values aligned with the organizational values, then you get a additional 2% level of commitment out of somebody. What we found is you could take away organizational values tomorrow and never use them again and double down on the personal values, and actual commitment, staff retention, engagement, and performance is likely to go up. So all we're saying is, of the two, the personal values are, without question, it's almost indisputable now, the neurologically effective ones, because they actually are at work in setting up your neurological pathways. That's what they form around. They don't form around external values like organizational values. Having said that, even my organization has 3 organizational values. So it's not that we need to take organizational values away. What we need to do is put the emphasis and the work into the personal values. Once you've got those, then you can look at what the shared common values of people are together, and out of those, draw out the high priority, strategically aligned values that your people already have embodied. Listen to that word, embodied, not embedded. Embodied within their own way of being together, their own sense of belonging, that align with what you're trying to achieve strategically, and off you go. And I think Mary asked an earlier question. She said, can you paint a picture of an organization with an excellent culture, please? And how does this relate to individual and personal values? So the example I'm going to give you is Z, who I've done work with right from the inception back in 2010. In fact, I was working with Shell Oil before it even became Z. In New Zealand, they are my standout example of working really effectively, and they've done the hard work to enable this. But they put the huge emphasis on personal values. So just last year alone, I think 4/5 of the employees re-clarified their personal values with us. And what that does is provide a sense of what values you're participating in with your fellow culture members, by having a look at what are the higher priority values that emerge out of that. And then Z is able to calibrate its organizational values, its so-called formal values, with the cultural values to see not that they're the same. We're not necessarily looking for them same. In fact, even having them same can be problematic. That's a whole different story. But that, to Jeremy's point and to Rod's point, that they're aligned. And here's what we mean by aligned. So this gets quite technical. What you're looking for is, if you think about organizational values in anthropology, are referred to as goal values, right? So let me give you an example. It's like I said, our goal here at Company X is to operate with the value of integrity, with the value of respect, and with the value of customer centricity. So that's our goal, right? These are our aspirational company values. Our cultural values are unity and diversity, sharing and listening, and contributive service. So you'll hear that the three kind of values within the culture are different from the organization's formal values, but the cultural values provide the means for people to channel their energy, their decision-making, their collaboration, their contribution, their courage, heck, even their humor, into the organizational values that then enable the culture to align into kind of its overarching purpose. So it's very important you get a distinction between what we call goal values, which is the ultimate thing we're trying to achieve, and means values, which are what are the means of us being able to live these company values. So company values are always at the mercy of the underlying personal values that the people bring into work and take home with them every day.
So when you talk there about cultural values, is that I suppose, summation of, not the summation, but the group of people, not personal values in the organization? It's the ones that bubble up as the ones that come through from the culture.
Yeah, yes, which is often different. Again, especially in New Zealand, what I find is often, unless the founders come up with a set of values, and that again can be a really powerful way of doing it. The founding members set up the values, and now the law practice embrace those 5 generations later. That can still work really, really well. But it goes back to Rod's question: is if you're doing that, then as part of the recruitment process, you would put a huge emphasis of when you get through to the close of the recruitment process with your final candidates, you would offer them the opportunity to clarify their values, so that when they come in for final interview, you can talk to them about having reflected on the personal values, how do they see it relating to, or how do they see their personal values can contribute into your law practice values. So again, you've got that goals and means relationship. But the second thing is, it can be quite problematic when you get, and this is quite common, as I said, in New Zealand, where the executive team go off on an executive retreat to reshape or refresh the company values and sort of come back and almost announce them to the business. That's almost a guaranteed way of having values failure in your company. The slightly better option is, if the executive team insist on doing that, is to go away, have a look at the values, but then bring them back and share them with people and go, look, here's what we came up with, but we'd love your thoughts, your challenges, your contributions, your suggestions, and we can kind of refine this. And then the ultimate version is both, first and foremost, empowering people to clarify their own personal values, because that just helps in terms of productivity, stress levels, decision-making, belonging, engagement. Heck, even staff engagement is primarily determined by the individual identifying to what extent their personal values are firstly safe to be lived in your environment, or the opportunity is there for them to optimize the experience of their personal values in the workplace. The moment you get it safe and I can optimize my personal values, you get high engagement. But again, was that fireworks just appeared on screen?
Yeah. I don't know what that's all about.
Wow.
Awesome. You said something there that resonated.
Yeah, well, I wish I could remember what I said. And then the second thing is, and I just want to I just want to really double down on this because it's a trick that I think a lot of organizations neglect to include as part of the process. Is when I start working with clients will invite me in to come kind of work with their culture. One of the first things I say is, oh, can you share with me what are your company values? And they go, yep, A, B, C, and D. And I say, great. And I said, and how did you create those? And they explain it. I go, great. And then here's my follow-up questions. How do you know you selected the right ones? Out of all the values you could have selected, how do you know these are the right ones? And not all the time, but often enough for it to kind of have caught my attention is these were the most popular values. And so, well, that's great. That means you're probably creating, a lovely, warm environment, which is great because it, creates a sense of belonging, etc. But are they strategically aligned? Which is where we start to say, are those the values that are going to optimize performance and people's fulfillment of working here for this business to succeed?
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap up now. That's been a brilliant conversation. Really enjoyed it. I've learned a huge amount. So thank you very much. I'll just go back to one thing you said at the beginning was culture is not the way we do things, it's why we do things this way. And we've gone through just looking at the importance of personal values. So we've got Michael's an offer which we will send through to you in terms of if you want to use him for your personal values in your company. So he's got a one-time offer for people on the webinar. So we'll make sure that anyone on the webinar gets that in the email we'll send to you. Thank you once again, Michael. It's been fantastic having you on here. And again, if anyone wants to find out more about Govn365 and what we do and help your organisational health check there as with people and cultures as part of that, then please contact me. If not, then have a wonderful day. Thank you, Michael. Thanks everyone for your great questions, and look forward to seeing you soon. See you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.